Tonight, her family wants justice. They say she didn't deserve this. She was the mother of 2 children. What was supposed to be a fresh start at Unit 504 for Mary Jayne Collins and her 2 sons ended tragically on October 4th. Accused murderer Dewayland Hurst is on the run as police lay out his alleged motive and brutality. According to court records, Hurst's brother was killed by Michael King in 2020. King had a son with Collins. When officers arrived at her apartment a week and a half ago, they found the boy and his brother peering out the window. Their mother's body lay nearby. She had been stabbed to death. Ring cameras captured Hurst leaving 30 minutes earlier.
Seabrook, Texas. A tranquil coastal community with quiet neighborhoods and salt-tinged air. In this peaceful setting lived Mary Jayne Collins, a 23-year-old mother devoted to raising her 2 young sons. Mary Jayne was a young mother determined to build a good life for her children. Friends recall her warm smile and the gentle, caring way she spoke about her boys. She juggled the responsibilities of parenthood with resilience, hoping to give her kids a childhood filled with love and safety. But Mary Jayne's life had not been without challenges. She had become a mother while barely out of her teens, and one of the fathers of her children was no longer in the picture. In fact, he was behind bars. Still, Mary Jayne persevered as a single mom, striving to provide stability for her little ones. Her family stood by her side, ready to help with the kids when needed, and Mary Jayne remained determined and hopeful about the future. Beneath her optimism, however, there were subtle signs of strain. Mary Jayne didn't share all her troubles openly, but those close to her sensed she was carrying a burden. She had known heartbreak and hardship early in life, yet she kept pushing forward for the sake of her sons. No one could have imagined that this devoted mother's life was on a collision course with a danger far beyond anything she'd faced before. Little did Mary Jayne know that a fateful connection from her past was about to put her and her children in unimaginable peril. Mary Jayne Collins was more than a victim. She was a daughter, a friend, and a loving mother trying her best. The story of how her life was cruelly cut short begins with the relationships and events that drew a dangerous threat into her world, setting the stage for a tragedy that would shock the entire community. Mary Jayne's path to tragedy began with a connection she could not avoid. Years earlier, she had been involved with a man named Michael King, the father of one of her sons. Their relationship had ended long ago, but its shadow still loomed large. In 2020, Michael King was convicted of murder. He had fatally shot a man named Dejuan Triplett during an altercation. That act of violence sent King to prison and left Mary Jayne raising their child alone. What Mary Jayne may not have fully realized was that Michael King's crime had sown the seeds of vengeance in another's heart. Dejuan Triplett, the man King killed, was the half-brother of Dewayland Ernest Hurst, a young man from nearby Texas City. Hurst was furious and grief-stricken over his brother's death. He couldn't strike back at King. King was securely behind bars, so his simmering anger turned elsewhere. In a twisted leap of logic, Hurst set his sights on Mary Jayne Collins, the mother of King's child, as the proxy for revenge. Through no fault of her own, Mary Jayne became the target of Hurst's rage toward Michael King. It was a dangerous connection that linked a young mother to a vengeful stranger, forged by a murder that had nothing to do with her actions. In June 2024, Dewayland Hurst entered Mary Jayne's life under the guise of friendship and romance. Mary Jayne, unaware of Hurst's true intentions, believed she had met someone new who cared for her. The two began dating, and for a brief time, it might have seemed Mary Jayne had found support and companionship after years of single motherhood. Hurst was 22, close to Mary's age, and outwardly friendly. But beneath that friendly exterior lurked a chilling motive. According to investigators, Hurst's relationship with Mary Jayne was not a coincidence. It was part of a calculated plan to get as close as possible to Michael King's family. Mary Jayne had no idea that the man she let into her home was harboring hatred against the father of her child. She could not see the dark intent behind Hurst's smile. As summer turned to fall, Hurst's true nature began to surface. What started as a seemingly normal relationship would soon spiral into something sinister and violent, fueled by Hurst's secret vendetta. Mary Jayne was now entangled in a dangerous connection, one that would put her directly in the crosshairs of a man driven by revenge. By the time anyone realized who DeWayland Hurst really was, the situation had already become perilous. Mary Jayne's innocent link to Michael King had unleashed a threat within her own home. The stage was set for a horrifying tragedy, all because of a chain of events she never could have foreseen. And as the true darkness in Hurst emerged, Mary Jayne's life descended into a nightmare of growing fear. It started with subtle signs, a bruise here, an anxious look there. As the weeks went by, DeWayland Hurst's caring facade gave way to control and cruelty. Behind closed doors, Hurst began to reveal his true temperament. He became jealous, easily angered, and increasingly violent toward Mary Jayne. What had once seemed like a chance at love turned into a cycle of abuse and fear that Mary Jayne felt powerless to escape. Mary Jayne tried to keep up appearances, but those closest to her noticed something was wrong. In the days leading up to the tragedy, she finally confided in friends about the terror unfolding at home. She admitted that Hurst had been abusing her, and she even showed them injuries to confirm her ordeal. Dark bruises, bite marks, and other wounds on her body told the story of escalating violence. Her friends were horrified. They urged Mary Jayne to get help, to report the abuse, or to leave Hurst if she could. If you're following Mary Jayne's story and it's resonating with you, feel free to share your thoughts or experiences down in the comments. And if you want to support stories like this, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. It helps us keep shining a light on these important stories. Mary Jayne was afraid, and with good reason. Leaving an abusive partner can be the most dangerous moment for a victim. She knew what Hurst was capable of, and she feared what he might do if she tried to break away. Tragically, no intervention came in time. Mary Jayne's friends saw the evidence of her abuse, but were limited in how they could help. It's unclear whether Mary Jayne contacted the authorities or if she felt too threatened to involve police. What is clear is that Hurst's violence was escalating unchecked. He had isolated Mary Jayne in a prison of fear and manipulation. Each day that passed without outside interference emboldened him further. The abuse continued, hidden behind the walls of Mary Jayne's apartment, a nightmare that only she and her children witnessed firsthand. Hurst's control over Mary Jayne tightened. He monitored her movements and frightened her into silence. Mary Jayne's two little boys were caught in this tense environment, undoubtedly sensing their mother's fear. To the outside world, Mary Jayne might have tried to smile through the pain, but inside her home, she was living in terror. It was a ticking time bomb, and everyone close to Mary Jayne prayed it wouldn't explode. She was making plans to change her situation, quietly preparing for a way out. In fact, Mary Jayne had just taken a significant step, moving to a new apartment, an attempt at a fresh start away from the constant threat. But for Mary Jayne Collins, time was running out, and the worst was yet to come. The final week of her life would become a desperate fight for survival that sadly no one was able to stop. As September 2024 turned to October, Mary Jayne Collins was hanging on by a thread. She had moved into a new apartment in Seabrook, perhaps hoping to distance herself from DeWayland Hurst and the abuse. For a moment, that new place might have symbolized hope, a tiny sanctuary where she and her boys could breathe a little easier. But if Mary Jayne thought a change of address would keep the violence at bay, she was tragically mistaken. The final week of her life would prove to be the most harrowing of all. In that last week, Mary Jayne's world spiraled toward a deadly confrontation. Court records later revealed that as Mary settled into her new home, the violence escalated. Hurst was not letting go. If anything, her attempt to start fresh enraged him further. Mary Jayne's injuries grew more severe, her fear more palpable. She likely felt trapped, trying to protect her children, trying to placate Hurst's temper, and possibly planning how to escape for good. We can only imagine the courage it took for Mary Jayne to wake up each day and care for her kids under such strain, all while walking on eggshells around an increasingly volatile abuser. In those final days, Mary Jayne reached out to friends in despair. She showed them the bruises Hurst had inflicted, the bite marks on her skin, visible proof of the torment she was enduring. Her friends later recounted these chilling details, describing a Mary Jayne who was terrified and running out of time. Each day that week, Hurst's behavior grew more erratic and menacing. Perhaps Mary Jayne knew she had to act soon. Perhaps she told someone, "If something happens to me, it was him." We don't know if those words were spoken, but the fear she felt indicates she sensed the danger was reaching a climax. As the first days of October ticked by, an eerie tension hung over Mary Jayne's household. Any hope that moving apartments would save her was fading. Unbeknownst to Mary Jayne, Hearst was preparing for a final act of vengeance, one that would fulfill the dark purpose he'd harbored since the day he met her. She was living her last week, though she couldn't know it, and in that final week, with options dwindling and Hearst's anger at a boiling point, events were set in motion that would lead to a morning of bloodshed and heartbreak. Mary Jayne Collins was about to face the ultimate horror, and nothing would ever be the same for her family after it. The dawn of October 4th, 2024, arrived like any other day. Mary Jayne got up in her new apartment, tending to her little boys. But before the morning was over, violence would erupt and a terrifying confrontation would seal her fate. The final chapter of Mary Jayne's life began that morning. A chapter of chaos and courage, of cruelty and innocence shattered. October 4th, 2024, a day that would end in unspeakable tragedy. It was late morning around 11:30 a.m. when a call to Seabrook police came in. A frantic report of a man with a gun at the Teakwood Apartments, possibly pointing it at children. That man was Dwaylen Hearst, and inside the apartment with him were Mary Jayne Collins and her two young sons. What unfolded in those moments is the stuff of nightmares. Earlier that morning, a dramatic confrontation had already begun within the apartment's walls. Dwaylen Hearst had grabbed Mary Jayne's phone and initiated a Facetime video call to none other than Michael King, the father of Mary's son and the man Hearst blamed for his brother's death. King was in prison, serving time for murder, when suddenly he was face-to-face via video with a scene that would make his blood run cold. Hearst angled the camera to show himself looming beside Mary Jayne and one of her children. The little boy stood there, likely confused and scared, as Hearst orchestrated a cruel performance. "Tell your daddy what I'm about to do," Hearst essentially commanded the child, forcing the boy to repeat disturbing lines. The child, under duress, was made to say, "Daddy, be mean. Look what he's going to do to me," or words to that effect. Mary Jayne's heart must have been pounding. She can be heard in the background of the call, crying and pleading, "No, get away, baby. No, get away from him." Her voice was frantic, a mother's desperate attempt to shield her child from harm. Then came a sickening moment captured on that live video. Hearst slapped the little boy hard across the face, a shocking act of violence delivered for Michael King to witness from his prison cell. In that instant, the video call cut off. We can only imagine the chaos that followed. Mary Jayne, already petrified, would have rushed to comfort her child, or perhaps confronted Hearst in a fury of maternal protection. Hearst, high on rage and vengeance, turned his wrath fully on Mary Jayne. What exactly transpired in the next few minutes remains known only to Hearst and those two little boys. But the outcome was devastating. Hearst brutally attacked Mary Jayne Collins. The Harris County medical examiner would later determine that Mary Jayne died from severe blunt force trauma and a single fatal stab wound to her upper body. It appears Hearst beat her and plunged a knife into her, an act of utter brutality. Amid this violence, a firearm may have been brandished or even fired. Initial reports to police mentioned a possible shooting. The noise or commotion prompted neighbors to call 911. Hearst knew time was short. After stabbing Mary Jayne, he fled the apartment just minutes before police arrived, vanishing like a shadow. Mary Jayne's sons were left in a bloodied home with their lifeless mother on the floor. When officers reached the scene, they encountered a tense silence. Two small faces appeared at the window, the children peeking out in fear at the sound of authoritative voices outside. Gathering courage, the boys eventually unlocked the door. What police found inside was horrifying. Mary Jayne Collins lay on the floor, unresponsive and covered in blood. The apartment bore signs of the struggle, possibly overturned furniture, evidence of the violence that had erupted. The children were shaking, crying for their mom, but mercifully, aside from the earlier slap, they were physically unharmed. Immediately, officers swept the apartment, guns drawn, hearts pounding, but Hearst was gone. The threat had evaporated, leaving behind only its tragic aftermath. Paramedics could do nothing for Mary Jayne. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Outside, additional police units and a SWAT team swarmed the area, trying to track the killer who had just slipped through their fingers. An ordinary October morning had transformed into a crime scene, and the life of a young mother had been brutally taken in front of her children. The violence was over, but the real horror for those little boys, in the quest to bring a murderer to justice, had only just begun. Two innocent children lived through the kind of terror no child should ever witness. In the wake of the attack, Mary Jayne's sons, both under 10 years old, stood trembling near their mother's body, eyes wide with shock. They had just seen the unthinkable. Perhaps the older boy clutched his younger brother's hand as they peered out the window at the arriving officers. It's hard to fathom what these little ones were feeling. Fear, confusion, the desperate hope that someone was coming to help. When the police coaxed them to open the door, the boys did so bravely. In that moment, they became the only witnesses to their mother's final moments. Inside the apartment, officers gently ushered the children away from the gruesome scene. The eldest boy might have had a reddened cheek from the slap Hurst delivered, a stinging reminder of the cruelty he'd endured. Both children were likely crying, calling out for their mommy, even as paramedics confirmed what these boys must have already feared: their mother was gone. The trauma those children suffered is immeasurable. Not only were they present during the violent outburst, but one of them had been directly involved, used as a pawn in Hurst's vendetta. It would be a moment seared into their young memories. The sight of Hurst attacking their mother, the sounds of her screams, and then the terrible quiet after he fled. Officers at the scene tried to comfort the boys. They assured them they were safe now. Neighbors peeking from behind police tape watched in heartbreak as the children were carried out, their faces wet with tears. Investigators would later say it was possible the children saw everything, and their frightened statements helped piece together the crime. The older child may have told police in a trembling voice how DeWayland hurt mommy, giving authorities an immediate suspect to hunt. Indeed, by the time the sun set on October 4th, detectives had identified 22-year-old DeWayland Hurst as the man responsible and launched a massive search to find him. With their mother's body taken away and their home turned into a crime scene, Mary Jayne's sons faced an uncertain future. That same day, they were placed in the care of loving family members, relatives who would now have to do their best to shield these boys and help them heal from the horror they had witnessed. The trauma would not fade easily. Counselors and family would need to work patiently to reassure two broken hearts that the bad man was gone and could never hurt them again. For Mary Jayne's family, seeing the children alive was a blessing amid the tragedy. Scared but safe, as police described. In the darkest moment, at least the boys had survived. But the innocence of Mary Jayne's sons had been shattered forever in that apartment. They lost their mother in the most violent way imaginable. What the children saw that day ensured that Mary Jayne's murder would haunt many lives, and it strengthened everyone's resolve to capture DeWayland Hurst. Those little boys deserved justice for their mom, and so began an all-out manhunt to track down the man who had inflicted such pain on this family. DeWayland Hurst had vanished into the wind, but he would not get far. The Seabrook Police Department, joined by neighboring agencies, launched an intense manhunt for the 22-year-old suspect. Officers scoured the area around the apartment complex within minutes of the murder, but Hurst had a head start. An entire community held its breath as patrol cars, K-9 units, and even a SWAT team combed through streets and nearby woods, searching for any trace of the fugitive. Neighbors were on edge, locking their doors, knowing a desperate killer was on the loose. Within hours, Hurst's face and name were broadcast on local news. Police obtained a warrant for his arrest and warned the public that he was armed and dangerous. Tips began to pour in, but Hurst proved elusive. He had fled Seabrook, likely returning to familiar territory in Galveston County. Days turned into weeks without an arrest. For Mary Jayne's grieving family, each day Hurst remained free was agony. They pleaded for justice, with Mary's relatives telling reporters that Hurst needs to be arrested. The community echoed that sentiment. Everyone wanted this man caught before he could hurt anyone else. Investigators followed every lead. They coordinated with the U.S. Marshal Service and neighboring police departments, anticipating that Hurst might try to hide among acquaintances or even leave the area. His photograph, a young man with a thin mustache and hard eyes, was circulated everywhere. Crime Stoppers offered rewards, and Hurst's mugshot even appeared on social media feeds, urging citizens to call authorities if spotted. The manhunt spanned much of October 2024, a tense period of uncertainty. Mary Jayne's murder weighed heavily on the minds of Seabrook residents, and officers worked around the clock knowing that a volatile individual was out there. Finally, after 24 days on the run, the break came. On October 28, 2024, a coordinated operation tracked Hurst to a location in Texas City, about 30 miles from Seabrook. Acting on a tip, law enforcement moved in swiftly. Units from the Galveston County Sheriff's Office, Texas City Police, Galveston Police, and U.S. Marshals converged in force. Hurst tried to escape. True to form, he didn't surrender easily. He attempted to flee and even resisted arrest when cornered, but there was no escape this time. Officers tackled him to the ground and at long last snapped the handcuffs around his wrists. DeWayland Hurst was in custody. The news of Hurst's arrest rippled through Seabrook and beyond. A collective sigh of relief could be felt. The man accused of murdering Mary Jayne Collins had finally been caught. Mary's family could rest a little easier that night knowing Hurst was behind bars, unable to harm anyone else. The manhunt was over, but the road to justice was only beginning. Now, with Hurst detained, investigators turned their full attention to building an ironclad case against him. They had to ensure that this man would answer for his crimes and pay for the life he had taken and the family he had destroyed. The next challenge lay ahead in courtrooms and case files. The fight to make sure Mary Jayne Collins' killer would face the full weight of the law. With DeWayland Hurst in custody, law enforcement and prosecutors moved quickly to assemble the mountain of evidence against him. This was not just any murder case. It was one steeped in a twisted motive of revenge and documented domestic abuse. From the outset, detectives had a clear narrative. Hurst had befriended, abused, and then murdered Mary Jayne Collins as part of a vendetta against her ex-partner. Now they needed to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, and the evidence was both compelling and chilling. Investigators drew on court documents, digital evidence, and witness testimony to reconstruct the timeline of abuse and murder. Mary Jayne's friends came forward to recount how she had shown them bruises and bite marks, stating that Hurst had inflicted those injuries. Those accounts painted a picture of escalating violence in the weeks before Mary Jayne's death. Additionally, forensic evidence from the crime scene was gathered. The knife used in the stabbing, if recovered, blood evidence, fingerprints, all likely tying back to Hurst. But perhaps the most damning piece of evidence was the video call incident that Hurst himself orchestrated. Several of Mary Jayne's friends had received that haunting video the morning of the murder. The Facetime call where Hurst taunted Michael King and slapped the child. Investigators obtained copies of the video, which captured not only Hurst's face and actions, but Mary Jayne's pleas and the child's distress. It was a real-time recording of Hurst's cruelty, and now it would serve as key evidence of his motive and state of mind. In the video, Hurst is heard instructing the child to speak to his father, essentially telegraphing his intent to harm Mary Jayne and her family. That footage, paired with the fact that Mary Jayne was discovered wearing the same clothes seen in the video, proved that the call took place just moments before her murder. The prosecution could argue that Hurst killed Mary Jayne immediately after that call ended, making the video a virtual prelude to the crime. On top of that, Hurst's own background bolstered the case. Public records showed he had a prior felony conviction for evading arrest in a motor vehicle. And at the time of Mary's murder, he was reportedly out on bond from other charges. This painted a portrait of someone with a disregard for the law and a willingness to run from authorities, exactly what he did after killing Mary Jayne. Moreover, the motive was clearly outlined. Hurst's half-brother had been killed by Michael King, and Hurst set out for revenge by targeting Mary Jayne. Court documents explicitly stated that Hurst was motivated by a vendetta and that he saw Mary Jayne and her children as proxies for Michael King. Every aspect of the crime, from dating Mary Jayne under false PREDR, piece by piece, the case against Hurst solidified. By the end of October 2024, he was formally charged with Mary Jayne's murder, as well as multiple other felonies related to the incident, including aggravated assault for attacking the child, and possibly charges for evading and resisting arrest when he was captured. The Harris County District Attorney's Office prepared to move forward, confident that they had a powerful case to put before a jury. They had a coherent story backed by hard evidence and eyewitness testimony, including potentially the heartbreaking testimony of a child who saw his mother's last moments. As investigators and prosecutors did their work, Mary Jayne's family watched from the sidelines, grappling with grief but cooperating fully to ensure justice would be done. The legal process was underway. The case built against Hearst was strong, and it had to be. Nothing less would be acceptable when it came to getting justice for Mary Jayne. Every fact uncovered, every piece of evidence preserved, was one step closer to making sure Hearst could never harm another soul. Now the stage was set for the next battle, the courtroom fight to hold a killer accountable. For Mary Jayne Collins' family and friends, the arrest of Dwaylen Hearst was a huge relief, but it was only the beginning of their fight for justice. In the aftermath of the murder, her loved ones had been vocal about one thing. They wanted to see Hearst answer for what he had done. Hearst needs to be arrested, they had demanded when he was still on the run. And now that he was captured, they shifted their plea to a new demand, that Hearst be punished to the fullest extent of the law. As the case moved into the courts, Mary Jayne's family attended hearings, their faces drawn with grief and determination. Hearst appeared in an orange jumpsuit, hands shackled, no longer the menace in the shadows, but a defendant facing a potential lifetime in prison. He was formally indicted on charges including first-degree murder for Mary Jayne's killing and additional charges for assaulting her child and other related offenses. If convicted of murder in Texas, Hearst could face decades behind bars, possibly even life in prison without parole given the brutality and premeditation of the crime. Prosecutors signaled they would pursue the maximum penalties. This was more than a murder. It was an atrocity committed in front of children, fueled by a vindictive scheme. The justice system was preparing to respond accordingly. Mary Jayne's family steeled themselves for the legal journey ahead. Each court date meant reliving the pain, hearing investigators recount how Mary Jayne was killed, seeing crime scene photos, listening to 911 calls or that harrowing video. It was excruciating, yet they showed up, often wearing purple ribbons or domestic violence awareness pins in Mary's memory. They wanted the world to remember that Mary Jayne was not just a victim in a news story, she was a beloved mother, sister, daughter. Their presence in the courtroom sent a clear message. We will speak for Mary Jayne now. We will fight for her. The community rallied around them as well. Neighbors and even strangers, shaken by the cruelty of the crime, offered support. Many could not fathom the evil of a man who would befriend a woman just to murder her in front of her kids. At candlelight vigils, prayers were said for Mary Jayne's soul and for her boy's recovery. Social media filled with messages of outrage at the failure to protect Mary sooner and calls to do more about domestic violence so that no one else would suffer Mary Jayne's fate. In many ways, the fight for justice extended beyond the courtroom. It became about raising awareness, ensuring that warning signs of abuse are heeded, and that abusers face consequences before they escalate to murder. Meanwhile, Hearst's defense, if any could be mustered, remained unclear. What could he possibly say? The evidence was overwhelming, and his motive, revenge, was not one that would garner any sympathy. It's possible his attorneys might attempt an insanity defense or claim he acted in sudden passion. But the months of calculated abuse and the recorded video call strongly pointed to premeditation. Mary Jayne's family braced for a trial, ready to endure whatever it took to see Hearst convicted. They wanted a verdict that proclaimed him guilty on all counts. As of the latest updates, Dwaylen Hearst remained in jail awaiting trial, with no bond given the severity of his crimes. The wheels of justice can turn slowly, but they were turning. Prosecutors continued to gather every shred of evidence, determined not to leave Hearst any room to escape accountability. And through it all, Mary Jayne's loved ones held fast to each other, finding strength in their unity and in the memory of the woman they lost. The fight for justice was not just on Mary Jayne's behalf, but for two young boys who would grow up without their mother. It was for every person in the community who felt the pain of this loss. They would fight until the end, until a jury's verdict and a judge's sentence would finally close this horrific chapter with the only acceptable outcome, that Dwaylen Hearst paid dearly for his monstrous act. Mary Jayne Collins' story is a heartbreaking tragedy, But amidst the sorrow, it leaves behind important legacy and lessons. In death, Mary Jayne became more than just a victim of one man's vengeance. She became a symbol, a reminder of the devastating consequences of domestic violence and unchecked rage. Her legacy now lives on in the two young sons she loved more than anything. Those boys will grow up carrying the memory of their brave mother. Family members say they see Mary Jayne's spirit in the children's smiles and hear her laughter in their play. The community has rallied to support them, ensuring they have the counseling, stability, and love needed to heal from this trauma. As they grow older, they will know that their mother died protecting them, and that she truly was an innocent caught in someone else's violent feud. The lessons from Mary Jayne's case are profound. First and foremost, it underscores how lethal domestic abuse can become, if not addressed. Mary Jayne did everything society asks of victims. She confided in friends, she tried to escape by moving, she protected her kids, yet it still was not enough to save her. This has spurred conversations in the community about how to better support those in abusive relationships, how to intervene decisively before it's too late. Organizations against domestic violence have invoked Mary Jayne's name in campaigns to raise awareness, emphasizing that bruises and cries for help must never be ignored. Neighbors and friends are reminded to take action if they suspect someone is in danger. One chilling truth is that Mary's abuse was known to a few, yet the system wasn't engaged in time. A hard lesson that perhaps more proactive measures, like encouraging victims to seek protective orders or friends to report abuse, are needed. Another lesson is about the destructive power of revenge. DeWayland Hurst's misguided quest to avenge his half-brother's death did nothing but create more pain and suffering. In trying to settle a score for a past murder, he committed another heinous murder, perpetuating a cycle of violence. Two families have been destroyed. Hurst's own family lost a brother years before, and now must face the shame and horror of what DeWayland chose to do. And Mary Jayne's family lost their cherished daughter and sister. Two wrongs do not make a right. If anything, Hurst's actions only compounded tragedy with tragedy. Society is reminded that vigilantism and revenge are never the answer. They only lead to more innocent people getting hurt. The case stands as a stark example of how unchecked anger and a thirst for vengeance can consume a person to the point of committing atrocities. Mary Jayne's legacy is also one of love and community resilience. In the aftermath, her family and even strangers came together in solidarity. Fundraisers were reportedly held to support her children's future. Candlelight vigils illuminated the night sky in Seabrook as people gathered to honor Mary Jayne's memory. They spoke not of the gruesome way she died, but of who she was, a loving mother, a kind soul, a young woman who had her whole life ahead of her. In the end, the lessons of Mary Jayne Collins' case serve as a cautionary tale and a call to action. It reminds us to be vigilant and compassionate, to support those who may be suffering in silence, and to demand justice for victims of violence. Mary Jayne's death will never be truly made right. No verdict or sentence can bring her back or erase the trauma her boys endured. But if her story can save someone else, if one person recognizes the signs of abuse and escapes, or if one community implements stronger protections for victims, then Mary Jayne's legacy will shine through the darkness of this tragedy. She will be remembered not only for the horrific way her life was taken, but for the love she gave in life and the change her story inspired in others. In memory of Mary Jayne Collins, may we all strive to protect the innocent, seek justice for the wronged, and break the cycles of violence that cause so much pain. If Mary Jayne's story moved you or made you think, feel free to share your thoughts down below in the comments. Your voice matters here. And if you want to see more stories that honor lives and seek justice, consider liking this video and subscribing to Murder We Heard TV. It helps us bring these important stories to more people who need to hear them. Thanks for watching and being part of this community.